We begin with Ukraine, where it was yet another day of heightened tension and hectic political activity. On Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visited Kiev and assured residents of American support. In strong words, Kerry warned Russia over Crimea. His visit coincided with the U.S. announcing a massive billion-dollar aid package. Shortly after Kerry left for France, Russia test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. For more on this developing story, we're joined by CCTV's Roy Rettenberg live from Kiev. Roy.
Indeed, Elaine, and John Kerry making a brief visit here on his way to Rome and Paris. Brief but impactful, some people say, allowing him to deliver a message that was seen as sympathetic for those watching in Ukraine, but also a stern message for those watching in Russia.
John Kerry isn't the first high-ranking diplomat to arrive in Kiev, but he's definitely a significant one. Even before coming, the American Secretary of State used some of the strongest language yet, calling Russia's actions, quote, an invasion. On Tuesday, he was warmly welcomed by Ukrainian officials, who had directly appealed to Washington for help. Kerry started the day by visiting the site of last month's deadly clashes. He spoke with some of the protesters who have been camped out there for months.
I wish you well. We will help you.
Then later responded to criticisms made by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
It is not appropriate to invade a country and at the end of a barrel of a gun dictate what you are trying to achieve. That is not 21st century G8 major nation behavior. And what we are looking for here is a responsible way to meet the needs of the parties, but respect the integrity, the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Speaking to journalists at the American Embassy, Kerry said that the U.S. was also working on an aid package that would help Ukraine's ailing economy.
I'm pleased to say that this package includes an immediate $1 billion in a loan guarantee to support Ukraine's recovery, and we are currently working with the Treasury Department of the United States and with others to lay out a broader, more comprehensive plan.
American businessmen in Ukraine say that's welcomed news.
A $1 billion package is good, and we also hope the United States will continue to work with the EU and the IMF to put a much larger, long-run financial package in here.
But some here were hoping for a little more, perhaps even American troops on the ground, if not here, at least nearby. John Kerry insists that Washington's response is appropriate and calculated, diplomatic and economic. Elaine?
And Roy, we understand that Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke by telephone on Tuesday. What more can you tell us about that call?
Indeed, the Chinese foreign ministers and Russian foreign ministers spoke just one day earlier. This, of course, would be a significant high-level phone call. Now, Xi and Putin have what's perceived as a good working relationship. They've met before. If you'll recall, Xi's first foreign visit was to Moscow, and Putin is expected to visit China later this year. Xi extending again that welcome over the phone. Putin offering his condolences over the attack in Kunming, and Xi Jinping basically reiterated
The common denominator in the strife in Ukraine and Syria is the support that those two governments get from Russia. And I'm wondering, sir, if you believe that that President Putin bears some responsibility for the intransigence of those two regimes. And to some degree, has this gone beyond just those two countries, and has it become a tug of war between two world powers?
With respect to Syria and the Ukraine, I do think it is worth noting that you have in this situation one country that has clearly been a client state of Russia, another whose government is currently been supported by Russia, where the people obviously have a very different view and vision for their country. And we've now seen a great deal of turmoil there that arose organically from within those countries. I don't think there's a competition between the United States and Russia. I think this is an expression of the hopes and aspirations of people inside of Syria and people inside of the Ukraine, who recognize that basic freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, fair and free elections, the ability to run a business without paying a bribe, to not be discriminated against because of your religion or your beliefs, that those are fundamental rights that everybody wants to enjoy. Now, Mr. Putin has a different view on many of those issues, and I don't think that there's any secret on that. And our approach as the United States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in competition with Russia. Our goal is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to make decisions for themselves about their future, that the people of Syria are able to make decisions without having bombs going off and killing women and children, or chemical weapons, or towns being starved because a despot wants to cling to power. Those express our values and our national interests. And we will continue to express those national interests. There are times, I hope, where Russia will recognize that over the long term, they should be on board with those values and interests as well. Right now, there are times where we have strong disagreements. And when I speak to Mr. Putin, I'm very candid about those disagreements, even as we will continue to pursue cooperation with Russia on areas where we have shared concerns. But I want to emphasize this. The situation that happened in Ukraine has to do with whether or not the people of Ukraine can determine their own destiny. My government and Vice President Biden and I personally have expressed to President Yanukovych the need for him to recognize the spirit of the Ukrainian people and work with that, as opposed to trying to repress it. And so we'll continue to stand on the side of the people. My hope is at this point that a truce may hold, but Stephen's exactly right. Ultimately, the government's responsible for making sure that we shift towards some sort of unity government, even if it's temporary, that allows us to move to fair and free elections so that the will of the Ukrainian people can be rightly expressed without the kinds of chaos we've seen on the streets and without the bloodshed that all of us, I think, strongly condemn.
Over the last several days, the United States has been responding to events as they unfold in Ukraine. Now, throughout this crisis, we have been very clear about one fundamental principle. The Ukrainian people deserve the opportunity to determine their own future. Together with our European allies, we have urged an end to the violence and encouraged Ukrainians to pursue a course in which they stabilize their country, forge a broad-based government, and move to elections this spring. I also spoke several days ago with President Putin, and my administration has been in daily communication with Russian officials. And we've made clear that they can be part of an international community's effort to support the stability and success of a united Ukraine going forward, which is not only in the interest of the people of Ukraine and the international community, but also in Russia's interests. However, we are now deeply concerned by reports of military movements taken by the Russian Federation inside of Ukraine. Russia has a historic relationship with Ukraine, including cultural and economic ties, and a military facility in Crimea. But any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. It would represent a profound interference in matters that must be determined by the Ukrainian people. It would be a clear violation of Russia's commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and of international laws. And just days after the world came to Russia for the Olympic Games, it would invite the condemnation of nations around the world. And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine. The events of the past several months remind us of how difficult democracy can be in a country with deep divisions. But the Ukrainian people have also reminded us that human beings have a universal right to determine their own future. Right now, the situation remains very fluid. Vice President Biden just spoke with the Prime Minister of Ukraine to assure him that in this difficult moment, the United States supports his government's efforts and stands for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic future of Ukraine. I also commend the Ukrainian government's restraint and its commitment to uphold its international obligations. We will continue to coordinate closely with our European allies. We will continue to communicate directly with the Russian government, and we will continue to keep all of you in the press corps and the American people informed as events develop. Thanks very much.